Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be reading from Christian Heroes Then and Now, Mildred Cable by Janet and Geoff Benge. Chapter 5, A Longed-For Dream Come True. The mules wound up a narrow street, the clatter of their hooves echoing against the mud brick walls on either side. First one person, then another yelled a greeting to Eva. The crowd followed the woman to the China Inland Mission compound, where the two slain missionaries had formerly lived. Soon Mildred and Eva were standing in the midst of a crowd of people, everyone smiling and bowing. "We knew God would send us new women missionaries," one person said. "We have prayed daily for your arrival," another exclaimed. Mildred watched as Eva talked effortlessly in Chinese with the people. The door to the mission house was unlocked, and everyone crowded inside. The place was a mess of upturned furniture and torn books. One wall had collapsed. "We'll repair it now that you are here," said a man who appeared to Mildred to be in charge. Eva caught Mildred's eye. "This is Mr. Wang," she said, introducing the man. "He leads the Christian work here." "Glad to meet you," Mildred said in her best Chinese. The two missionary women stowed their belongings in one room of the house and set out to explore the town. A large group accompanied them, talking over one another in their excitement. As they walked, Mildred was bombarded with questions. "How old are you? How are your parents? How many children do you have? Do you really mean to say you have no husband? Who will look after you when you are old?" The questions just coming, just as Eva had warned Mildred they would. It was hard for the Chinese to get their minds around the fact that foreign women seemed to have so much control over their lives. In China, women had few options with regard to how they lived their lives. As a child, a girl was to be subject to her father, as she got older, to her husband, and then as an older woman, to her son. She was not free to make decisions about what she would do with her life. These decisions were all made for her. The father arranged his daughter's marriage, often to a man she had never met before. It was then her duty to serve her husband and bear him sons. A woman brought dishonor on herself and her family if she could not produce a boy. Boys were venerated in Chinese society and girls frowned upon. And so, single Western women generated a lot of questions from the Chinese, men and women alike. London had been a busy city, but to Mildred the streets of Huochao rivaled it. People were everywhere, buying and selling everything from food items to clothing. The aroma of food cooking rose from behind courtyard walls and permeated the place with the smell of grease, pork, and fish. The scraps from these meals were tossed into the streets, where pigs scavenged through them, eating all the choice morsels and pushing the remainder to the edge of the narrow lanes. Even through the pig stank, Mildred appreciated the way they cleared the lanes. The noise, the crowds, the dirt, the smells of Huochao did not put Mildred off. Quite the opposite, she relished all she was experiencing. She found it hard to believe that she was here at her mission station in China. It was an answered prayer, a longed-for dream come true. Over the next several days, the two women met with many Christians in the town and toured the opium refuge founded by Pastor C. Mildred was impressed. The refuge was located on a street called Prospect Hill and sat next to the most important temple in Huochao. While the refuge was housed in simple mud brick building inside over the years, hundreds of opium addicts had found help through the power of prayer and the message of the gospel. When he founded the refuge, Pastor C used a combination of medicine, psychology, and prayer to help addicts overcome their addiction to opium. Mr. Wang, who now ran the refuge, used the same approach. Mr. Wang was deeply respected by those who came to the opium refuge and by the local Christians throughout the area. He had himself once been addicted to opium and understood the struggle and torment in the lives of those who sought help at the refuge. He guided and encouraged them, and by the time they were free from the opium, many of the former addicts had become Christians. They looked to Mr. Wang for guidance on how to live their lives for God on a day-to-day basis. Many of these new Christians began attending the church in Huochao, and others returned to their villages to tell their friends and family what had happened to them. As she was introduced to Chinese ways of doing things, Mildred was especially fascinated on how the people had combined Buddhist and Confucian beliefs with ancient superstitions about spirits that ruled the world. In fact, much time was taken up in a person's life trying to trick the spirits into letting them alone. For example, Little Goat, a 5-year-old boy who lived near the mission compound, was almost always dressed in a bright yellow cotton jacket, in which were drawn the outlines of many insects, everything from beetles to centipedes to scorpions. On the right shoulder of the jacket was sewn a small pair of red and green pants, where a heavy padlock was suspended from a silver chain around the boy's neck. Little Goat's mother explained to Mildred that the outlines of the insects were meant to confuse the spirits into thinking her son was one of the insects and so protect them from insects' bites, since insects did not bite each other but bit only humans. The tiny pants were to protect him from measles, and the padlock and chain were there to ensure that the little goat enjoyed a long life. Mildred knew it would be a while before she adjusted to people holding such strange beliefs. The first problem Mildred and Eva had to solve after their arrival in Huochao was where to live after while the mission house was being repaired. After talking the situation over, the two of them decided it would be an ideal time to tour the 4 countries around Huachao that they were responsible for. They would travel on donkeys and be accompanied by a guide who would lead them and the donkeys wherever they needed to go. This meant that they could only pack a few things to carry with them in addition to the books and pamphlets they would distribute. One morning, after the woman had spent a week in Huachao, 2 donkeys stood ready for them to mount. Each animal had a saddle and a folded quilt and a long bag draped over it. Mildred and Eva's clothes and books were tied up in large square kerchiefs and distributed as evenly as possible on either side of each donkey. As Mildred approached her donkey, she noted it had no reins or stirrups. Somehow she would have to learn to balance on the animal's back without anything to steady her while the guide led the donkey along. One of the Christian men who'd come to see them off stepped forward and hoisted Mildred onto the donkey's back, and off the woman went. It took a little while, but Mildred mastered the art of holding tight to the donkey's sides with her knees and anticipating the animal's movement so she could shift her body weight to account for it. Mildred was surprised how much energy it actually took to stay on the donkey's back. She was glad for the times when they stopped and dismounted to eat or rest or to talk with the local people they met along the way. The sun baked down as Mildred and Eva made their way along tracks among towering stalks of ripening corn rising on either side of them. At times, they ascended or descended winding, narrow trails over mountains or along the edge of ravines above rivers. Often they would have to ford these rivers, the surging water coming more than halfway up the donkey's sides. At night, they would come to small villages where they would stay with a Christian family and talk late into the evening, encouraging the locals and hearing their stories of how God had protected them during the Boxer Rebellion. They always had the same, and there were always the same questions. How old are you? How many brothers and sisters do you have? Do you have any children? At first, it was hard for Mildred to differentiate between the first 2 questions, which sounded almost identical to her when asked in Chinese. On more than one occasion, she answered in her halting Chinese that she was 5 years old and had 24 brothers and sisters, rather than the other way around. When told of her error, Mildred would feel her face turn red from embarrassment. But the locals laughed and enjoyed her strange answers, which seemed to endear her to them. Mildred got to laugh sometimes too, as she listened to the local pastors preach to the congregations. The Bible stories set in the Middle East were sometimes interpreted quite imaginatively by these pastors into the local Chinese setting. One time a pastor preached about the prodigal son, telling the congregation that the prodigal son had gone off to a far country to smoke opium. Mildred smiled as she listened to the familiar Bible stories being adapted to this new setting. She realized that the real message of the parable was nonetheless the same. Many of the villages the woman passed through were situated against hillsides, and locals dug caves to serve as their homes. Mildred soon came to appreciate the ingenuity of this approach. Being dug underground back into the hillside, the caves maintain a fairly constant temperature year-round, making them feel cool during the broiling Shanxi summer and warm in the bitter cold of winter. When there were no local Christians to stay within a town or village, Mildred and Eva would stay in an inn. The locals would sneak peeks through the paper windows to catch a glimpse of the foreign women. During the trip, Mildred got to see firsthand more of the superstitions that pervaded Chinese society and how fear of various spirits and demons drove people to go to extraordinary lengths to appease them. People's efforts were a contrast to the peace enjoyed by local Christians who did not fear the local spirits, but honored only the one true God who had brought them salvation. The infectious faith of the local Christians spurred Mildred on to encourage and strengthen them in their faith. Mildred and Eva traveled through the villages and the outlying areas of Chao Chung, Hong Tung, and Fensi for the next 3 months. By then, Mildred was feeling right at home on the back of the donkey. She hardly had to think about keeping her balance as the creature walked along. It just came naturally to her. But as the cold of winter began to descend over Shanxi province, the 2 missionaries decided it was time to head back to Huachao and begin their work there. However, Mildred and Eva were unaware that they would not receive the warm welcome they had been expecting when they returned.